So for my capstone project this semester, I chose to revisit a critical essay written in Dr. Elsie's Arthurian Literature class in the spring semester of 2017. This paper focuses on the importance of the voice of women and selects stories from the complete romances of Chrétien de Troyes, a set of romances that revolve around noble knights of the Round Table and their voyages into love and valor. I wanted to do this paper for my capstone because it showcases two subjects that I have become very passionate during my time here at Shepherd: women's empowerment and Arthurian legend. Personally, I have always been very fascinated by Arthurian legend since I first saw the Disney film rendition, The Sword and the Stone. After taking this course in college and becoming more knowledgeable about the subject matter and the history behind it, I thought it was then important for others to become familiar with the genre of literature as well. The second, and perhaps the most important reason I chose to do this paper, was because of the emphasis put on the importance of the voice of women in centuries where women were openly oppressed and dehumanized. This paper argues that the female characters, Guinevere from The Knight of the Cart, Bladine from The Knight with the Lion, and Enid from Eric and Enid, break free from the oppression of the patriarchy, and although outwardly silenced, use their voice and femininity to overpower and control knights even the strongest of men could not conquer, therefore exploiting the weakness of the patriarchy and opening new windows for women to proudly use their voices in later centuries. Unlike in the 12th century, in our society today, luckily we have a multitude of powerful women who openly use their voices to prevail against oppression and fight for equal rights. For example, women in the media today, such as Christina Aguilera, have quite literally used their voice and their platform as well-known artists to implement their stance on the importance of equality for women. Unfortunately, though, it has not always been this simple for women to speak up and express themselves publicly. However, despite their traditional roles as insignificant, in each of these romances, the subliminally strong female characters use their voice and femininity to become the main weakness to otherwise undefeatable knights, proving that the voice of women is unconquerable no matter what time period. So first and foremost, we have Queen Guinevere, the wife of King Arthur and the notorious adulteress. In this case, being the queen, Guinevere comes into the story with more authority than usual. However, it is quickly noted that she is frequently belittled and degraded by King Arthur, placing her right back into the category of oppressed women. Arthur reveals his true priorities and shows that he carries very little respect for Guinevere. Tired of being degraded and fully aware of her control over men, Guinevere takes the initiative to become the dominant force in a new relationship with Sir Lancelot, King Arthur's most courageous and loyal knight. Lancelot falls madly in love with the queen and begins behaving compulsively, wishing to physically harm himself if he could as much as not see her. He also loses sight of all integrity and loyalty he once had for King Arthur. In the critical essay, The Character of Guinevere in the Romances of Chrétien de Troyes, Peter Noble supports this argument when he says, in quotes, Chrétien makes an excellent job of the character of Guinevere in the Lancelot, showing her both as the queen and a dominant and passionate woman determined to dominate and control her lover, end quote. Guinevere's determination lands her the spot as the most dominant character in this story, regardless of the patriarchal values in force, giving her the highest amount of authority over even the most courageous and loyal knights. In addition to Queen Guinevere, and the Knight with the Lion, Chrétien gives us Bladine. Soon after this story begins, the valiant Sir Yvain slays Bladine's current love interest in combat, destroying her emotionally and sending her into violent fits of grief. However, using her femininity and sexuality, Bladine essentially creates her own tactics of revenge in response to losing her partner in battle and feeling degraded. Bladine gains back this dominance that was taken away from her in the grieving of her beloved when her beauty causes Yvain to fall immediately in love with her after just the sight of her. As the story progresses, Yvain eventually earns Bladine's hand in marriage. However, he does an exceptionally poor job at keeping it. When he breaks his promise that he had sworn to keep to come home from Camelot in just under a year, or just a year, he completely loses his good standings with his new wife. Upon the realization that Yvain had neglected her only wish, Laudine sends a message to him. A message reading, "Greetings to all other except Yvain, the liar, the hypocrite, the disloyal traitor." She follows this up by retrieving the ring that bound them two together. His carelessness then causes Laudine to feel degraded once again at the hands of a man, prompting her to bitterly end the relationship, destroying Yvain's manhood and dominance. When Yvain comprehends the gravity of Laudine's reaction, he omits all honor and dignity that he achieved as an undefeatable knight. In the words of Chrétien, "So violent a whirlwind broke loose in Yvain's head that he went mad. He clawed his flesh and ripped his clothing. He fled across the meadows and fields, leaving his men bewildered and wondering where he could be." In other words, Yvain literally runs away from his knightly duties and abandons every ounce of chivalry and dignity that he once knew. Not only does Yvain flee like a coward, he also starts behaving like an uncivilized savage, using weapons such as bows and arrows rather than swords, and eating the raw flesh of wild animals, actions that are particularly looked down upon in this type of society. His behavior is exceedingly shameful coming from a knight, and being caused by the words of a woman, unthinkable. In this case, Laudine uses her dominance and control over Yvain to strip him of his pride as a lesson that although she is a woman, she too has a voice and is not a force to be reckoned with. Finally, in Eric and Enid, although in a much more passive way, the character of Enid uses her voice to dominate her husband and revert the roles enforced on her by the patriarchy. Unlike Guinevere and Laudine, Enid does not begin with a voice whatsoever, and finally utters her first words 32 pages into the romance. However, before Enid uses her voice, she already develops a sense of dominance over Sir Eric when he becomes obsessively in love with her, abandoning again all manhood and knightly duties. Enid finally breaks her silence when she becomes aware of Eric and his loss of honor due to the infatuation he had found with her, informing him that his comrades have been undermining him and his quality as a knight. Eric quickly becomes embarrassed and enraged and attempts to once again dominate the two when he insists on embarking on a dangerous journey to revive his reputation. When the two lovers set out on this journey, Eric reverts from his lovesick ways and attempts to gain back his authority, ordering Enid to remain silent in his presence or bear the consequences. However, when Enid is the first to spot a variety of threats along the way, she is unable to hold her tongue and obey her lord's commands, therefore using her voice to dominate Eric by disobeying him repeatedly. It is best said in the words of the medieval theorist and enthusiast Thoma Fenster, who states that, and quote, "When Enid first defends her decision to speak out despite Eric's injunction for her silence, she posts the knight's possible defeat," end quote. Although threatened with harsh punishment, Enid's assertiveness overcomes her submissiveness, and she continues to speak out and protect her lord and show her authority. This is exceedingly significant because, as a knight, Eric's primary duty is to not only courageously protect his kingdom, but to protect himself and his lady as well. In this case, though, Enid breaks her silence with the intent to switch these roles and become the protector, essentially taking control of Eric's fate and gaining complete dominance over him. Ultimately, the presence and the voice of women in the complete romances of Chrétien and New Choice plays an extraordinarily significant role in the outcome of these stories. The women in these romances use their voice and femininity to overpower and control their male counterparts, proving that the voice of women today, and in centuries prior to equal rights, is a powerful voice that will not be silenced.
Sophia.
I found your reading of Guinevere really interesting because it seemed to suggest that the love triangle with Arthur and Lancelot, which I think in modern interpretations is often perceived as a struggle between Arthur and Lancelot for Guinevere's love, might actually be read as a struggle between Guinevere and Arthur for Lancelot's loyalty. Do you think that that's consistent with the way that Chrétien de Troyes portrays them, and how does that affect our understanding of the story?
I do think it's consistent with how Chrétien displays them, because I think a lot of like stigma around King Arthur is that he is this noble king, he's this great leader and whatnot, but actually in these stories we see that Arthur is kind of, and lack for better words, a prick. So it's almost as if people don't feel that they need to be loyal to him. So I think that the way that Arthur is portrayed does kind of influence that little love triangle between the two and the difficulties between Guinevere and Arthur. Dr. Elsie?
You want to maybe talk a little bit about how strong these women are in Chrétien, and yet when we get several centuries later, they really have lost their power, say in Mallory.
Yeah, so I thought that was really interesting because in the other text that we did read in that class, there wasn't very much importance on women at all. The only woman, well not the only woman, but the main woman that was focused on was Queen Guinevere, and how her and Lancelot's relationship affected the kingdom and really the turmoil of the entire kingdom. So I think with this being more focused on romances, the relationships and the way that the women affect their partners is more important in this than in Mallory. I feel like it's more almost historical. It's more about the quest for the Grail rather than the relationships between man and woman. Olivia?
So pretty much everybody you focus on in your presentation and paper are like ladies, like Queen Guinevere, Queen Ladine, and then Enid, who I think is she's noble, correct? Is Enid a noble? I can't remember.
After her marriage,
She's a Vavasur's daughter.
It's been like it's been
she's the lowest.
It's been a while since I took the course, but do you think that their like power is different than like say people who aren't of like that they may have more or less voice and agency than people who aren't of like nobility, being like a class element?
So in my actual paper for this project, I have Lunette in it as well, who is, I didn't put her in this presentation because I had to narrow it down to fit the time, but she is of lower class, but her voice also prevails against Yvain and, manipulates him and all of the other sorts. I think for the women that are of higher class, there's more of an expectancy for them to have a dominant voice, but I don't think that it's expected for these knights to go completely insane. But when we get to Enid, who begins of lower class, and again, she doesn't have a voice at all until a good bit into the romance, I think, and this is why I saved her for last, because I felt that was very important that she didn't have this voice yet. She still prevails over the oppression that is put on her, and she still is able to control the whole outcome of the plot, essentially.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Sophia.